Korea is obviously a subject that is extremely complicated. There's a lot to cover. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can, probably in like 45 minutes to an hour, then I'll leave time for Q&A, because it's always in the news and everyone always gets it wrong. And let me guys give you kind of a background of what the country is and what it's like while I try to strike pose this first camera as casually as possible this side. I first got interested in the subject because I was working on, I co-author books of celebrities. I was working on a book with a famous rock star whose name should not be mentioned, and I was trapped in his house behind barbed wire and attack dogs in the guardhouse, where the only things to eat were peanut butter crackers and peanut butter crackers. And my friend Justin, who ran a company which produced things like Baconaise, bacon lube, bacon condoms, and bacon caskets, and bacon salt. He got me out of there, he gave me some protein, and he said, you should write Kim Jong-il's autobiography. And I thought, this is a great idea, because everyone knows who he is, but no one knows anything about him. Kim Jong-il being the father of the current leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, the fat rocket man that we all see in the news all the time. And I thought, this is a great opportunity, how would I even go about doing this? So I was on, of course, Facebook, and I saw my friend Ed, who I went to college with his stupid grin, posing in front of the North Korean tanks in Pyongyang, the capital city. And I emailed him, I'm like, Ed, how did you get to North Korea? And he gave the obvious answer, which is he met someone at Burning Man. And the guy at Burning Man runs the company Koryo Tours, which facilitates tourism between the West and North Korea. They were also the tour company that Otto Warmbier, who was recently murdered by North Korea, was behind, but I have a feeling they don't mention that much in their literature. So I got on a flight. North Korea, it was, until recently, legal to go. It was expensive as hell, but I thought, listen, I am Jewish, I was born in the Soviet Union. These were two chances that my family could have been sent to a concentration camp back in the day. And North Korea does have concentration camps. There's over 200,000 people in them at a time. You can see the camps on Google Earth. So whenever you hear people cracking jokes about how fat he looks at his haircut, as I did 5 minutes ago, recognize that they kill entire families for political purposes at the same time. So now you don't know how to react. So when you get to North Korea, there's one flight in and out. It goes through China. And when you land, every part of your brain is telling you you don't belong here. It's this very weird vibe because North Korea does not allow access for the citizens or its tourists to the outside world. So they confiscate your phone at the airport. And there was actually one really funny story. I had this, my iPod Touch, and an iPod Touch is the same thing as an iPhone. There's just no phone functionality. And the guard, they're all military guards, he takes this at the airport, he's like, what is this? And how am I going to explain to him it's an iPod Touch and not an iPhone? And what he knew and I didn't is that if you flip it over, it says on the back. And he's like, oh, okay, here you go. And I'm like, okay, so that was the first big error. We're like, okay, I don't know what's going to go on here. Then I was looking outside in the parking lot, and there was a rich lady, and you know how people are rich in North Korea because they dress in their best 80s clothes, because that's like as far good as you're going to get there. And a military guy stopped her, and it's a very patriarchal society, and the men very much outrank the women, and he basically gave her a motion to have her ID, and she's on her cell, rolled her eyes, didn't even look at him, and handed him her ID and kept jabbering on the phone. And that's when you realize, okay, a lot of what you're taught is not what you think. Now, North Korea has, I think, currently, or at one point, it was the biggest structure in the Eastern Hemisphere, the Ryongyang Hotel, which is also known as the Hotel of Doom because it is structurally unsound, and then every year they say they're going to complete it. And as we're driving from the airport to the hotel, our guide to a functional hotel, our guide points to it and says, there's our latest rocket launch. So to have this sense of humor when you were there is also something I was not at all expecting. Now, there's a big myth people in the West have. There's two. One is, when you're there in North Korea, you're on a tour, right? And you're always with your guides, and you're always with the other tour people. You can't just wander around anywhere. That said, it wouldn't be weird at all if you go to London and go on a guided tour, or go to New York on a guided tour. So that's not really that ominous. And the other thing is, there's this idea that when you go to Pyongyang, the capital city, I know the movie The Interview, which I'll talk to maybe a little bit later, they try to make it seem like it's wonderful and that everything's going great. Absolutely untrue. Everywhere you go in North Korea, there's a fly. Even on the airplane, there was a fly, which is like a biblical symbol of evil. Every carpet has a stain. Every wall has a crack. If you have an elevator bank with 4 buttons, one will be mismatched because it was a replacement. They don't really have electricity. It's spotty in the capital city. So no matter where you look, you are going to see something wrong and some element of decay. And the smell in these buildings, which have poor air circulation, it's kind of like basement-y. So, they have like a central park, which we saw, and there's this beautiful marble fountain, but the water wasn't running and the lights weren't running and it was covered in mildew. So wherever you go in North Korea, you're going to see this kind of air of despair. And you realize also that in the capital city, it's as good as it gets. So when you think about what it's like in the rural areas, it's much, much worse. And it's not even a nice place to visit, let alone wanting to live there. They take you around, and they show you some things that are interesting, some things that are not interesting. One of my favorite moments is when we went to the DMZ. The DMZ is the border that divides the 2 Koreas, and I'll get into that also in a second. And usually you come from the south, and we were looking at it from the north. And one of the people on the tour had one of those accordion cameras, And I said, "Oh God, you're such a hipster." And my guide says to me, "What does that mean, hipster?" And now I have to try to explain to a North Korean what the term hipster means. And I remembered the definition my friend had, which is a hipster is someone who likes anything that's old-fashioned. She's like, "Oh, okay, she got it." And then in the hotel, there is a sweatshop. It's basically they sew suits for you if you want for tourists. They live in the hotel. I didn't realize that at the time. And I went in there, and they were showing me all these Western suits I could get made. And I said, no. I want a suit like from the 1940s with a collar, like the great leader Kim Il-sung had, not these Western-style suits. And my guy goes, "Oh, hipster." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." So she got it. And I got the suit, and I tried it on, and she's like, "Ooh, you look good." But so there's a humanity to these people. What I did, being from Brooklyn, being an obnoxious New Yorker, is anyone I saw on the street or anywhere, I made a point to get in their face and wave, because I knew the reaction would be sincere. And the reactions were perfectly normal. The grandmas would be proud of their grandkids, the teenage girls would giggle, and the teenage boys in the Adidas tracksuits would roll their eyes and kind of keep chewing their gum and look away. So the reactions were perfectly normal, and in this most abnormal country on earth. So let me give a little bit about North Korean history and how it got this way. Jesus, I'm going to take this jacket off because I am sweating like Roger Ebert. North Korea, Korea was its own country for centuries. In the late 19th century, Japan conquered it, and then Japan made it a colony, basically the property of Japan. They tried to wipe out Korean as a language. They forced everyone to take Japanese names. And this is, to this day, a source of great contention among Korea and other Asian nations. Remember, these were the Japanese who sat down with Hitler later and said, "I like what you're saying and I like how you're saying it, let's be best friends." So it's not what you're thinking about now with hentai and all that other good stuff that the kids like. Oh, okay. You just outed yourself. It was a colonial system, it was a very oppressive system, and so on and so forth. And then came World War II, and of course, with World War II, you had the victors, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and basically the U.S. and the Soviet Union decided to carve out what they're going to do with Asia. And Russia got a lot of stuff, and we got a lot of stuff, and it's like, what are we going to do with Korea? And the Americans wanted Seoul, which was the capital city, the biggest city at the time, so they took the map of Korea, drew a line right north of Seoul, and said, "We're going to get the south, you're going to get the north." Fine. And Korea, one of the problems they have with this is they go, "Look, we were not a combatant in World War II. The only 2 countries that were divided were Germany, home of the Nazis, and us. Why were we getting divided? Why have we remained to be divided?" So whenever you go in North Korea, they always claim and insist that Korea is one country, indivisible. They claim that Korea was the first country on earth. Korea was the first language spoken on earth. Korea was the first government on earth. So when they refer to North and South Korea, it's always lowercase n and lowercase s, because Korea is indivisible and the South is in its own country, but a region under the occupation of the U.S. imperialists. Now, according to North Korean law, whenever they refer to us, it's always Yank Devils or U.S. imperialists or things like that, or Yankee bastards. So it's very weird when you're reading their books, which I did as research for my book, and they'll be like, "Oh, in 1945, the Yank Devils, blah, blah, blah." And it's just like, it's got this newscastery tone, but they'll always have these slurs thrown in there. So what happens is after World War II, in the north, you had Russia installed their dictator, which was the great leader Kim Il-sung. And whenever you refer to Kim Il-sung or any of the leaders, you can't just say their name. You have to have some title with a great leader. Kim Jong-il's dear leader right now, we have Marshal Kim Jong-un. The United States installed our own little dictator in the south, Syngman Rhee. And basically both of these leaders claimed that they were the official government of the whole Korean peninsula. So you had one peninsula, two competing governments. And in the early 1950s, after, quote, stamping his feet to Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union and another real great hero of freedom, they invaded the south, and very quickly the North Korean army had, with the backing of Russia, had close to 95% of the peninsula under their control. Under Harry Truman, the US retaliated. We got the UN to have our back, and we drove them back, what North Korea refers to as a strategic retreat. And by the way, when it comes to World War II, they don't regard it as World War II. They regard it as the Fatherland Liberation War, which was won when the great leader Kim Il-sung expelled the Jap devils from Korea entirely. So all of their history is based on the idea that Korea was enslaved by the Japanese, and along came Kim Il-sung, and he's the one who saved this proud country from oppression. This is the entire basis of their worldview, the entire basis of their culture, the entire basis of their history. To this day, Kim Jong-un has that wacky haircut. He has that wacky haircut because that's the haircut Kim Il-sung had in the 40s. So he's hearkening back to, like, remember the good times when we were proud Korea against the Japanese and the US imperialists. So the Korean War goes on for a few years. You have eventually Mao and China jump in the north. So you have in the north China, Russia, and the North Korean army. In the south, you have South Korea, the US, and the UN. And Korea is in the middle. And basically, the entire peninsula was completely devastated. You had, huge loss of life. It was, just you have basically one country between huge boulders getting crushed. And this is, again, something that's very much in their propaganda to this day. They say, look, we had the Korean War. The Americans came, killed us all, and now at any moment the Americans are going to come back and finish the job. And again, 60 years ago is not that long ago. And we very much remember the Civil War and the Revolutionary War and the Vietnam War in our public consciousness. This was their big moment, and they claim, and this is the title of one of their books, that the US imperialists started the Korean War. So when you talk to refugees and they learn that Kim Il-sung started the Korean War, it's been described as akin to us finding out that FDR bombed the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. It just makes no sense to them because everything stems from the idea that they were the victims in the Korean War at the expense of the US imperialists. So basically the Korean War is fought to a draw. And in the early 1950s, Stalin dies, and in the Soviet Union, you had Khrushchev took over. And Khrushchev gave what was known as a secret speech, which was made public, and basically said Stalin took a wrong turn. He was an evil dictator. We've got to kind of humanize communism. And throughout the Second World and the communist countries, things started getting a lot less oppressive. They started closing down the gulags, which is a series of concentration camps across Siberia. And all these other countries liberalized relatively compared to what had been in the Stalinist period. However, North Korea said, no, this is a mistake, and Kim Il-sung doubled down. So what he started doing is to maintain his control of power, he started having these series of purges and maintaining racial purity. North Korea is the most homogenous country on earth racially, and it is the most racist country on earth. They regard other nations as subhuman animals, basically. They talk about this all the time. And basically he tried to start slowly, piece by piece, eliminating anything that wasn't Korean from North Korea. So if you spoke foreign languages, books written in other languages, Marx is obviously the basis of communism, and they said, well, now that we have Kim Il-sung, who has developed Marx for our current era, we don't need those books anymore. Those are barred, so people got sent to the concentration camps. And what Kim Il-sung put into place, he said, is class enemies must be exterminated to 3 generations. So what North Korea does, which Stalin and Hitler never even did, is if someone in your family does something wrong, they take 3 generations of your family and send them to the camps. Now, you don't know who did it, because it's not like there's a trial. Someone shows up at your house, says, come with me, and takes the whole family. And the thing that's even more insane, there's a very famous book called Aquariums of Pyongyang, which President George W. Bush read, which is why one of the reasons he put them on the axis of evil. And when the people go to these camps, sometimes they are released. And they basically have to sign a non-disclosure agreement promising not to talk about what life was like in the camps. But they are set for a finite period of time. They're not told how long they're going to be set for or why. So this is something that's been going on for a very long time. Another thing they did in the 50s to kind of maximize their hold of power, it had several different names. My favorite name is the Understanding People Project. Who does not want to understand people? I sure want to understand people. It sounds very nice. So what did they do? They interviewed every single person in North Korea, everybody, and they figured out what you and up to your second cousin was doing before the Korean War. Were you a priest? Were you a landlord? Those are bad. Were you a friend of the great leader Kim Il-sung? Were you an early communist? Those are good. Did you fight for the Korean People's Army? Those are good. Based on your family's loyalty to the regime, you were slotted into one of three classes: the hostile class, the favorable class, or the wavering class. And there's like 51 sublevels. And this is like a credit score. So basically, this determines where you can live in North Korea, whether you can go to college, whether you can go to the army, who you can marry. You are not told your credit score. You just have to figure it out by who the teachers are nice to in school, and if you can travel throughout the country. Unless you have a very high, this is called a sungbun, unless you have a high sungbun, you are not even allowed to step foot in Pyongyang. So I've met several refugees, and all their propaganda talks about how good the capital city is. They've never been allowed to see it. They're like, oh, is it as beautiful as you think? I'm like, no, it's like Newark. It's described in their books as this magical fairyland. It's nothing of the kind. So that's something that is one mechanism of control. Another mechanism of control they have is once a week, everyone in North Korea, this has happened since the 70s, everyone, has to get together with some group. It could be your class, it could be your neighborhood, it could be your office, and you have to get up in that meeting and say, this is what I did wrong this week, and this is what I saw you doing wrong this week. And then you have to get up and you have to round out somebody else, and you had better have something to say. So when people talk about why don't they just revolt and overthrow the government, this is a nation where once a week everyone has to rat out each other by law. So the idea that 2 or 3 people can get together and conspire is absolutely impossible, because then all I have to say is, I saw you 3 talking outside the class one day. Those are counter-revolutionary elements, and things will be very bad for you and your families indeed. So they are very, very, people talk about how crazy they are. They are brilliant in their evil and in their sense of control over the entire country. Come the late 60s, Kim Jong-il, the son of the great leader Kim Il-sung, and his uncle were vying for power to see who was going to succeed the founder, Kim Il-sung, to be the next leader. And they started telling these stories in the press, glorifying him more and more. The stories you hear to this day are often supernatural. The great leader Kim Il-sung can walk on water. He can turn leaves into bullets. He can be in 2 places at once with his fast-moving magic, and all this other ridiculous nonsense. And when you talk to refugees, the way to think of him, it's not like he's a god, but it's kind of like Uncle Sam. We all know Uncle Sam can pretty much beat up anybody, and he can. If he's in Virginia today and he's in Washington State tomorrow, none of us would blink. But we all know Uncle Sam's not a real person, but it's kind of this mix between reality and the supernatural effect. So what ended up happening is Kim Jong-il got appointed as the successor to the great leader Kim Il-sung, and this was a huge problem for them in terms of communism, because according to communism, it's all equal. The idea that someone's kid is going to take over the family business, let alone the government, is the exact opposite of communism. And what I learned when I was doing research for my book, and I'll talk about that in a second, is every criticism of North Korea, they have answers for, and they're often very, very brilliant. For example, one of the big criticism is, you guys claim that Kim Il-sung was fighting the Japanese, before World War II, but there's no historical evidence for this whatsoever. And they say, look, that proves how strong the Japanese censorship was. They've left no traces in the literature whatsoever. And so one of their questions was, how are you going to have Kim Jong-il take over for his father Kim Il-sung in a communist country? They said, look, when you had Stalin give way to Khrushchev, the revolution took a turn for the worst. So only someone who is as close to the current leader as possible, i.e. his own flesh and blood, can take over and keep the revolution as is necessary. So they have an absolute reason for doing what they're doing. And in fact, this is something which drives me crazy. A lot of times you'll have people in the press talk about North Korea, and they talk about the North Korean Constitution and all this other stuff. North Korea actually has a series of 10 commandments. And the 10th commandment is, thou shalt follow, paraphrasing, the revolution founded by the great leader Kim Il-sung through the generations until it's completed. What this means in law is only a descendant of Kim Il-sung can be the leader. So recently, I'm sure some of you know, Kim Jong-un's half-brother Kim Jong-nam was killed in that airport. There was a lady with a shirt that literally said LOL. She went behind and put a napkin on his face and it had some toxic agent. He died. And the reason for this is, if you have two brothers and one is killed, you can't take out the other one because no one else can take his place. So it's not like there's a Mike Pence there that if Kim Jong-un is taken out, it has to be someone who's in the Kim Il-sung bloodline. So let me talk a little bit more about, so basically Kim Jong-il is slated to be the leader. North Korea and South Korea were going neck and neck until kind of about the 80s. And in the 80s was one of the first times that China turned on North Korea, because North Korea and South Korea weren't in the UN, because North Korea was fighting it, saying, if we're both in the UN, that will make permanent our series of division between the North and the South. And at one point, I think it was 1984, I believe, South Korea was given the Olympics. And this was a big deal because this showed that South Korea was coming into its own and that the war wounds of the Korean War had been healed. And Kim Jong-il called the South Koreans and he said, hey, let's share the Olympics. And the South said, well, first of all, it's not a country that has the Olympics, it's a city. Number one. Number two is you guys do not have the facilities to host the Olympics. And number three, it's not really our call to make. And he's like, come on. And they're like, no. And he's like, all right. So what did he do? He got two agents and they went on a plane and they took a bomb and they stowed it safely in the overhead compartment. And when there was a layover, they didn't go back on the plane and the plane blew up, killing everyone on board. Because he wanted people to be scared to go to Seoul for the Olympics. And instead, Kim Jong-il had his own communist Olympics. I talk about this in the book, which is every bit as daft and crazy as you might think. And this is a reason why, for many years, North Korea was on the state sponsors of terrorism list. Another thing that they did for decades, and you hear all these stories about North Korea, and you want to think, okay, this is just crazy propaganda. For decades, North Korea would kidnap people from Japan, random people on the beach, from a mall, so on and so forth, and take them there. It's not always clear why. Apparently the biggest reason was to teach them Japanese and to teach them to be spies, and so on and so forth. But they have no respect for their own human life, so why would they have respect for other countries? And in fact, I was saying earlier how every criticism of North Korea they have an answer to. The UN recently attacked them for having concentration camps, and they said, we don't use that term, so we don't have any. When they were attacked for having human rights abuses, they said, well, according to us, human rights means national sovereignty, so when you criticize us, you are violating our human rights. So you can't argue with people, really, who aren't negotiating good faith and who are lying to you with a straight face. In 1989, and a few years after that, you saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that's when things got really bad for North Korea, because for years, basically North Korea was getting welfare from the Soviet Union and from China. It would work like this. They had something called friendship prices. So let's suppose Russia would send North Korea $1 million worth of gasoline, or oil rather, and North Korea would send them like a ton of socks that were just disgusting and no one could wear, and they said, okay, we're square. So it's basically this barter system to kind of keep the country propped up. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, they're like, you know what, we don't need anything from you, you are terrible. And China's like, yeah, our big trading partner is South Korea, you guys are terrible. So North Korea increasingly became more and more isolated from the outside world, which to them is also kind of a source of pride. Remember, they're according to the ideology of the great leader Kim Il-sung, what they call the Juche idea, anything for Koreans and by Koreans is good for Korean people. It's this ultra nationalist thing, which has very, very pernicious consequences. So what happened is, without gasoline, you can't run the factories. Without the factories, you can't produce fertilizer. Without fertilizer, you can't grow crops in a nation that is so mountainous as the North Korea is. So people started having to eat whatever they could. They started eating grass, then they started eating bark, then they started eating weeds, and eventually got to the point of people eating saccharin just to have something in their bellies. And I watched a video recently, which will bring a tear to your eye if you have any humanity, where North Korean refugees were given different kinds of barbecues, and then tried different barbecue sauces from all over the country. And one of the people said a sentence that no one should know, which is, when people are about to die, the flies are the first to know. And he said how in his village, he'd see like a little baby, and as soon as the fly landed on their butt or in their mouth, he knew they were minutes away from dying. And this is something that no one should know, but the North Korean government said, look, if we let in other countries to give them food, then they won't need the government. Kim Jong-il said having too many people makes socialism difficult. The UN came to try to help, and what they would do is they would take them to Village A on Monday and show them happy, healthy people, and they'd bring them to Village B on Tuesday and show them happy, healthy people, and then bring them back to Village A on Wednesday. And when the UN said, we were just here on Monday, they said, no, you weren't. And what are you going to say to them? They were not allowed to have Koreans on staff. They were not allowed to have Korean speakers on staff. They were just basically shown around, and the UN eventually quit. The North Korean economy completely collapsed. 1 to 2 million people starved for no reason other than the North Korean government wanting to maintain their hold on power. Medicine started going. Sewage started going. They even had polio returned. And this is all preventable, but it wasn't prevented because of the government. In 1994, the great leader Kim Il-sung passed away shortly after a visit from Jimmy Carter, who cut a deal with him. Kim Jong-il took over. Everyone predicted in the West that North Korea would not be long for this world, because Kim Jong-il is not going to be able to take up the slack from his father. It's now 2017, and they're still around, and everyone else has gone by the wayside. When Kim Jong-il took over for his father in 1994, his campaign slogan was, "Do not expect any change from me." Perhaps the first honest politician we've ever seen. It's unfortunate the honesty is in the context of such depravity. And he basically clamped down on power. He had a purge. The people at the very top, you know how I said earlier everyone's watching each other all the time? Well, the people at the very top are the ones who are most watching each other. So the idea that some generals can take out a leader, when Kim Jong-il took over, the people who were loyal to his father got the axe, sometimes literally, and he brought in his own people, and they're there explicitly because they're loyal to the regime. They're not. It's not like Trump's cabinet where some are on the fence about him. No. They are there explicitly because they think he's the best thing since sliced bread. Now, when I was there and I was doing research for my book, they take you to the bookstores. It's all the books are either there's some children's stories, but all the books are about the great leader Kim Il-sung, the dear leader Kim Jong-il. But there's one book that's not about them, about Ri In-mo, who is the North Korean Nelson Mandela. And since he's North Korean, of course, he's better than the real Mandela. He was someone who was a prisoner in South Korea for decades, and so on and so forth. So when you read these books, what's fascinating is all the stories, other human beings don't exist except for the leaders. So it'll say something like, when he was a child, the dear leader Kim Il-sung was in kindergarten, and his teacher, or it'll talk about his friend. These people are never named. It'll be a story like this, the dear leader Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il went to a factory. There was a problem with the factory. No one knew what to do. He looked at the machine. He fixed it. Everyone applauded and clapped. The next day, there's a problem in another factory. So, or the great leader Kim Il-sung went to, in the 80s, the great leader Kim Il-sung went to a foreign country to attend the funeral of its leader. So there's never dates, there's never facts, it's all this mythology, and it reads like that, and it's very, very creepy. So when I was there, I was trying to pick my guide's brain to figure out what she knew about the outside world. So I asked her about 9/11, and she's like, of course we know about that. Well, and the fact that she said of course told me that she thinks they're getting all the information that they can, and I'm not surprised that they know about 9/11 because it was us taking a hit, so for them that's a good thing. But we were at the DMZ, and there was a praying mantis, and me being a complete dick and having a bad sense of humor, I said to her, I thought this is an atheist country, why is there a praying mantis? And she had no idea what I was talking about. And then I told her the Aesop's fable of the fox and the scorpion, and she didn't know what a scorpion was. I'm like, okay, she doesn't know the word. So I'm like, like the lobster that lives in the desert, nothing. I drew it for her, nothing. And then I realized, wow, if you think about how many times you have encountered the concept of a scorpion, the astrology, comic books, nature shows, a million contexts, but because they don't have any there, they're not taught it. So it was very interesting that something she had total awareness of, something she had absolutely no awareness of. When I was at the DMZ in the 1970s, there was this famous incident where there was you had the south looking to north, north looking to south. In the middle, there was this tree, and the Americans wanted to prune the tree to get a better view of the north. And the North Koreans took the axe that the Americans had and chopped them up to death. The axe is still on display in the north. I saw it with my own eyes, nice and bloody. And the Americans came the next day with like a huge amount of force, which they called Operation Paul Bunyan, and they pruned the hell out of that tree and left just a stump as a giving North Korea the finger. So when we talk about like, oh, the things that are happening now have never happened before, they chopped up our countrymen in the 70s. So this is not particularly new. They've been at us for a very long time. And when people get apoplectic, they're kind of losing the context. One of the other things is when kind of the worst part for me on the trip is they take you to a school and all the kids are super cute because they're all like their little general's uniforms and the girls are in their little dresses, they sing and dance for you. But hearing how you all hear kids who are sick and they have those coughs and it's not a big deal, it's just, we don't maybe have nieces, nephews, younger brothers or whatever. But hearing those chest colds and realizing these kids can never have medicine, and these are the richest of the rich, because if North Korea doesn't produce it, you're not allowed to have it. And so it's a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. It was just very, very, very disturbing. And one other great moment was before we went to the school, we went to a general store. And we were going to buy candy for all the kids. And our guy told us, okay, we're going to buy candy, we're going to give it to the teacher. And my Soviet brain knows exactly what that means, which is we buy the candy goes to the teacher, and the candy goes back to the store. So the store has our money in the candy. I had no doubt this was going to happen. So I took some of these chocolate coins in my pocket, and the kids swarmed us when we got to the school. One little boy grabbed my hand, as he was trained to do, and I told one of the girls on my tour, I said, when I give him this candy, take a picture. And she's like, we're not allowed to give him candy. And I said, when I give him this candy, take a picture. And she's like, okay. So I slipped in his hand, he looks up, I go, shh, and he put it in his pocket really quick. She got the picture. So I got that kid some candy. And, as the days go on, everyone on my tour was getting drunk. I did not want to do that because I just wanted to be aware of everything that's there. When you're there, you're in a hotel, which has been colloquially called the Alcatraz of Fun, because it's on an island in the river in the middle of Pyongyang, and you're not allowed to leave. You're also not allowed to go on different floors. So our guides, the floors are segregated by nationality. Our guides, their floor had no light. It was all blacked out too. So they stepped off the elevator into darkness, which, like, more power to them, whatever. But I'm pretty sure, I know Otter One Beer was on my floor. Shane Smith from Vice did this great thing about the Vice guide to North Korea. I'm 99% sure he was actually in my room. The hotel accommodations were fine. People always ask me, what was the food like in North Korea? The weirdest thing is they would give you like pound cake with your bread before the meal, which I couldn't wrap my head around, but the food was like kind of like a crappy Chinese takeout. It's perfectly fine, but it's not great. And we asked, and the food does not go to waste, so that was a good thing. But it's not like you're seeing hungry people in the capital, but you are seeing a lot of dirt. And another funny moment is, they took us to this park on the last day, and the waitresses were all singing and dancing, and they were all singing with us. And they had this book about, teaching Korean to English. And they're a very, very, very chaste country. They do not have sex education. It's very chaste. In fact, I saw this video once of a Canadian journalist. It was his second trip to Pyongyang. And the fact that they have an ostrich ranch in Pyongyang, which we did not get to go to, but he's at the ostrich ranch with his North Korean guides, which is one of the greatest visuals ever. And he goes, all right, you guys, we talked about gays and lesbians my last time here. They're like, yeah, we don't have that. And he goes, well, what about bisexuals? And they go, what? And they're like, okay, we just started to wrap our heads around this whole gay thing, and now there's something else to throw in the mix. Like, they thought he was trolling them, but he was not. But they have so little information about the outside world. Kenneth Bay, who was another one who was recently taken captive, like, his guards were picking his brain about, like, what an average person can own and buy, and they couldn't wrap their heads around it. They had no concept of just how wealthy an average person is, because this is a country where people have to worry about getting food on a daily basis, and again, for no reason other than their regime. what else can I tell you about the trip? The thing is, the people, when we were at the DMZ, the question I always have, people always have for me, is how much do they believe the propaganda, how much do they hate Americans? So while we were at that museum with the bloody axe, and they were in 1953, or when there was the armistice signed for the Korean War, it was at Panmunjom in North Korea. You know, the dossier was still there, and the flags, the UN flags were still there, and we were told that they were so embarrassed that they fled the country and left their crap behind with their tails between their legs. And while we were being given this tour, down the hall, down further in the room, there was a Russian tour group, and their North Korean guide was speaking Russian. And I speak Russian, and I went up to them. And the Russian guy, being a blowhard like all Russians are, he said, "You apologize to this woman for what your country did to her." And I said in Russian, "I'm very sorry, we will never bomb you again, or bring war." She goes, "Okay, well, I forgive you." So the people at the top know it's crap. The people at the top know this is all propaganda and that it's all bull. And it's the people in the countryside who have never really turned on the TV who really believe that the leaders are kind of these magical people. So, you know, come the 90s, you had the starvation. The reason they started their whole nuke program was the idea that if you look at countries that have nukes, Pakistan, China, those are the ones that don't get invaded. Libya gave up its nuclear program. Gaddafi personally was killed. Saddam Hussein was personally killed. Ceausescu in Romania was personally killed. When these leaders lose their hold on power, they often are themselves personally killed. So there was a video in Romania of when their dictator, who very much looked at North Korea, when he and his wife were executed after a 5-minute trial, and Kim Jong-il took this video, showed it to the top party cadres, and said, "If the masses rebel, this is what's going to happen to each and every one of you, like this." And he showed them that video every day, I don't know for how long, to show them you have to do everything you can to maintain your hold on power, or else you personally are going to be executed. So the idea that they could kind of take their finger off the trigger is something else that's a big no-no for them. So Kim Jong-il had at least 3 wives that we know of. The eldest son from the first wife was Kim Jong-nam, and Kim Jong-nam wanted to liberalize. He said, look at Beijing. You've seen China, the economic miracle there. He was a bit of an environmentalist, which in a communist country, which has like a power grid on their emblem, is insane. And he wanted to denuclearize. And Kim Jong-il told him, if you want openness, open a window, which I wish I could do right now. He was also very famously caught in the 90s in Japan with a fake passport. His passport was from the Dominican Republic, and the name was Chinese for fat bear. He was a big fatty. And when the cops asked him, "Why are you here?" he said, "I want to go to Disneyland, Japan." And everyone in the West reported this story with a straight face to show how crazy North Korea is. In actual fact, he was there to get there to get money for an illegal arms shipment. North Korea is a big black market arms dealer, and they resent the fact very much that the U.S. imperialists get to sell our weapons all over the world. Why does North Korea, as a sovereign nation, not have that same right? I made this point when I was on Tucker Carlson. You see all these missile launches on TV. Why are they doing this? They're doing this because these are commercials. If I'm a country like North Korea the size of Pennsylvania, and I have this weaponry, and I have the UN and the US yelling at me and not being able to do nothing about it, if you buy our product, you're going to be in that same great position. And it's the best commercial for and the proof is in the pudding, it's the best commercial for their product you can possibly think of. But getting caught in Japan was kind of humiliating for North Korea. He kind of lost favor, and the idea was to have Kim Jong-un take over. He's the 3rd son. The middle son is apparently an Elvis Clapton devotee, groupie, and is described as a sissy and too much like a little girl. So he was absolutely not an option for the North Korean leadership. And Kim Jong-il's sister, Kim Hyung-wee, who is really a very sick and evil person, her daughter married a guy who had a low sungbun, a low social standing in North Korea, so she drove her to suicide. So these people very much eat their own, kill their own. It's very Game of Thrones. And let's just talk a little bit about Kim Jong-un's reign in the context of where North Korea is going. For a long time, starting in the 90s, the Guard, the Tumen River separates North Korea and China. It's very shallow, so people would be fleeing all the time. And even if they weren't fleeing, all they had to do was bribe the guards who weren't getting paid by the government, and then you're home free to China. So again, the North Korean government, being brilliant, it's evil, had the new policy is, you can keep the bribe as long as you turn the people in. So now even the people who are being bribed are being sent. And of course, if you try to escape North Korea, that's 3 generations of your family that's getting sent to the camps. However, as the government is being unable to pay for their enforcer, the black market is kind of providing. So what people are doing now is, if you manage to get your way to China, the family that's left behind will bribe some government official to issue a death certificate for you so that the whole family gets to be safe. And the rule is, everyone who is a North Korean citizen is automatically a South Korean citizen and vice versa. So if you're from North Korea, you just got to get yourself to the South Korean embassy or to the airport in Seoul. If China catches you, they will send you back, and you will have very dire consequences. The Chinese know this, and unfortunately very many women who try to flee North Korea are captured and forced into slavery or sexual slavery because they know if they don't do whoever caught them's bidding, they are going to probably be executed. Let me talk about what life is like in these camps, because it's almost impossible for us to imagine. In the camps, they have punishment even within the camps. So not only do you have to do your job on a daily basis, but if you act up, you are going to have consequences. For example, there was a woman who was raped by her guards, and because you are not allowed to have sex with your guards, they ran her over with a truck, and now she had cut off her legs, and she still had to report to work pushing herself along in a tire. Men are sent into mines, and they are never allowed to leave, and if you don't have sunlight, you have vitamin D deficiency, your skin starts falling off, and if you kill yourself in the North Korean camps, too bad, your family has to fulfill your quota, your work quota. So even death is not an escape from these absolute monsters. So one of my big points is, whenever you see the news reports talking about how wacky all these people are, you'd be pretty wacky too if someone had a gun to your head and to the heads of your family at all times. I would be the first one to put on that clown suit, and I would wear it proudly, because I would do whatever it took to keep me safe from this absolute crazy regime. And recently things have been escalating between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, and you heard some feedback about like, oh, you shouldn't talk to him in such a tone. It's like, well, that's the tone that they use, and you could very easily make the argument, if someone's being aggressive, you have to be aggressive back. We remember in July or August, they said they were going to hit Guam, and President Trump said, oh, we're going to strike them with fire and fury which the world had never seen. And everyone's like, how can you talk to them like that? Well, Guam's still here. So they've been threatening for a long time to launch strikes, and this is something that's a core element of their ideology. One of the stories that explains why Kim Jong-il is worthy of having the Supreme Commander title is Kim Il-sung, the great leaders with all the generals and with Kim Jong-il, and he says, well, what happens if the Americans win? And all the generals are like, oh, no, that'll never happen, we're the best. He goes, well, what if we do lose? And Kim Jong-il says, if we lose, we will destroy the world. And Kim Il-sung says, spoken like a real Supreme Commander. So their ideology is based on the idea, if we go down, we're taking as many people as we can with us. Even if they didn't have nukes, Seoul, which is like New York in terms of its skyline, is directly south of the border. The idea of missiles hitting Seoul and taking down those skyscrapers would be like Independence Day, the movie. So and they wouldn't even hesitate for 2 seconds, because if they're willing to kill their own, why wouldn't they kill another country? And in fact, and they are trained since youth. Kids have to stand outside the library in the middle of the night in thin coats. They have to go to school at midnight to check on their desks for U.S. spies. So their myth is, since the U.S. imperialists first came to North Korea in the 1860s, this is true, we sent a ship to Korea, the USS General Sherman, and the Koreans killed everyone on board and sank the ship to the bottom of the Taedong River. They said, we've been biding our time since the 1860s to come back and kill everyone. And any type of escalation, you see you see troops around, you see carriers around Korea, they go, look, we're not making it up. The Americans are here to finish the job. Remember, they killed your grandma. So from their perspective, we're kind of feeding into their propaganda. I don't know where this is going. This is a game of chicken where you have two cars going at each other as fast as possible, and it's a question of who's going to blink. It seems like neither can blink. But the other thing that's positive is it's very clear that that the U.S. and North Korea are negotiating behind the scenes, and a lot of this public stuff is just for show, and you can ignore it fairly easily. And I'll tell you one more story, and then I'll leave us time for questions. So the last day, I was talking to my guide, and she was getting pretty drunk. And I said to her, I go, you know, she had the same haircut my mom had in like '82, so that was also like really kind of eerie, you know what I mean? Because it hit very close to home. I showed my friend who's Russian photos of Pyongyang, and he goes, it's like Leningrad with Asian people walking around in Russian clothes. Like it bugged him out. So I said to my guide, I go, so they have something there called Cholima, which is a Pegasus, which is the symbol of speed. And I said, if I could send you anything from the West, what do you want me to send you? And she goes, a Porsche. And I said, lady, I'm not sending you a Porsche, and I'm not sending you Cholima either. And she goes, well, we have the original one here. What do I need you to send it to me for? So they're very quick. And I said, well, what do you actually want? She goes, she wanted a hand lotion. Can't get hand lotion in the whole country. And perfume. And I said, well, what kind of perfume? Now, we all know how hard it is to describe scent. I mean, the language is not suited for that. And she's struggling for the word, and what she was looking for was feminine. And you realize this woman is a millionaire. You know, the guides are very wealthy. If you're allowed to talk to foreigners, you are very trusted by the government. Another funny thing, when you go to the DMZ and people have torn jeans with their knees ripped out, that's taken as proof in North Korea of how poor we are, because why else would we have holes in our clothes? So I got her the perfume, I smuggled that in for her, and I said, you know, talking to you, it shows me what my mom went through back in the day and what it was like for her growing up. And she just stared at me, she goes, oh, then your mother must have hated Russia. So I don't know if it's better when you're a prisoner, if you don't know that you're a prisoner, or if you do, but they are increasingly aware of what's going on. They're increasingly skeptical about the government. They increasingly see the government as corrupt. And hopefully that's how the Soviet Union ended. Hopefully this is going to be, you know, the end of the most evil regime on earth. Okay, that's been an hour. Let me give time for questions, because I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, because I think the kids don't like asking questions nowadays, but I'll be glad to answer any questions you guys have. Yes, go ahead.
What do you make of Jimmy Carter trying to go to North Korea?
So Jimmy Carter went to North Korea right before the great leader Kim Il-sung died. He cut a deal with them. Jimmy Carter actually is the one who cut a deal between Israel and Egypt. I think he'd be really good at it. I think he'll be very good. One of the things I think Trump is doing is playing good cop, bad cop with China. So Jimmy Carter can say, look, President Trump's a lunatic. You better work with me. I'm the sane one here. North Korea doesn't want to be destroyed. I'm sure they want a deal on their terms, so I think that would be very possibly a very good thing. Yeah, go ahead.
A professor in a class was telling us recently that obviously what you just said about North Korea, why they started the nuclear program and everything, do you think that when President Trump makes comments like the fire and fury comment, do you think he's making them double down on their efforts instead of backing off of it? Do you think he's making it worse, or it's not really having any effect at all? Because obviously nothing's going to make that better.
So North Korea just in the last month or two had a press release, and they said, we have a hydrogen bomb now, and it was built all with homegrown ingredients. And most people took this as glorifying the Jewish idea, which is from Korea, by Korea, for Korea. And what that meant, actually, reading between the lines, is even if you embargo us and sanction us and close us up from the outside world, you're not going to be able to stop us. So that was what they were saying with that message. I think they have no incentive to slow down on their nuclear program. The more power you have, the better you are in a negotiating position. And in terms of them being crazy, this is a point I often make. There's two types of bank robbers. There's the bank robber who goes in the bank and shoots up the ceiling and wants the loot. And there's the bank robber who goes in the bank and shoots up the people. Now, there's no question you want to deal with the first type. You know, this is very, very obvious. And when they're firing these missiles, they're firing them into the ocean, in the Sea of Japan. They're not firing them at Seoul. They're not firing them at Tokyo. So these people are very clever in what they're doing. I don't know. I think we've tried nice rhetoric in the 90s with the Clintons. We've tried nasty rhetoric with Trump. I don't think anything Trump said is as bad and from their perspective, as Bush putting them on the axis of evil, because the axis of evil was Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. North Korea says correctly, what the hell do we have to do with Iran, Iraq? The Bush White House explicitly said, well, we don't want to come off as racist, so we have to have like a non-Muslim country to throw in there. But they have nothing to do with each other, these three. Iran and Iraq themselves had a long war in the 80s. And that was very obviously Bush's kill list. His fantasy was take out Iraq, take out Iran, take out North Korea. So they're like, look, if you have every American president, and they talk about this, goes on TV and says all options are on the table, right? We all heard this kind of line. That means if we want to nuke you, we will. The only country that has ever used nukes in a war setting was us. And it wasn't a crazy New York guy with 3 wives. It was Harry Truman, a moderate Democrat from Missouri. So there's a huge reason for them to keep going down this road. Because again, Kim Jong-il said to fight the American eagle and the Chinese dragon and the Russian bear, we have to turn North Korea into a hedgehog. By which he meant an animal with spines in every direction, meaning missiles. So I don't blame them for what they're doing, but it's very, very scary. Go ahead.
So if a war was to break out between the U.S. and North Korea, what do you think would be the reaction of Russia and China?
First of all, let me make another point, and I like making this on when I do TV appearances on this because people lose their minds correctly. Every one of these concentration camps are told explicitly and repeatedly, if the U.S. imperialists ever invade, we're going to kill you all and burn these camps down. So you're looking on day one of genocide. And they absolutely mean it. So that's number one. The question is, what would Russia and China do? China doesn't want 25 million refugees crossing the river, setting up camp in Manchuria, 25 million refugees who don't speak Chinese. Russia has a small border with North Korea. They don't want to deal with the problem. It would very much depend on what the circumstances would be, how the war broke out and how limited it was. I know China was very displeased by what happened with Otto Warmbier, because China is trying to be a world leader, a rival to us, and you can't with a straight face defend a college kid went to another country invited as a tourist, was trespassing, stole a poster, and now he's dead. I mean, no civil country can defend this with a straight face. So this is a big problem. This blew up in North Korea really, really badly. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I was wondering how much as a tourist you actually have to watch what you say, your actions and your words. Is it an actual concern?
So it's safer there than here because you are a guest of the government and human life means nothing. So the reason why they're big on tourism is with the collapse of the Soviet Union, they're producing nothing of value and they want hard currency because their currency is worth nothing. So they want dollars, they want Chinese RMB, they want yen. So I could do anything I want and I probably would have been deported. And everyone knows to treat you very, very well there. I mean, I felt beyond safe. I just felt very, very creepy. And wherever you go, things are weird and you're looking and you're like, why is this like this? Everything was there for a choice, obviously. And you can't wrap your head around all these little things you see everywhere you go. So I was taking pictures obsessively. The guides never looked at my phone. They never asked me to delete any photos. There's only 2 rules that they have, which they didn't even enforce. You can't take photos of any military stuff, which makes sense. And there are these giant, 8-story statues of the great leader, the dear leader of Pyongyang, where everyone has to go and bow. And if you take a picture of statues, you can't crop them. It has to be the whole statue. No one knows why, but that's another rule. So other than that, you can take pictures of whatever you want. And I took pictures of all the decay as well. So yeah. Go ahead.
How freely could you move around the country when you were visiting?
Not at all.
Okay.
You're there on a tour. They will tell you where you're going. But they've opened up the entire country now, including the Northeast, where the poorest people are for tourism. So people are seeing, it at its worst. The Northeast is where the most people start. And they have a very sick sense of humor. I met a refugee, she's from the Northeast, and I think a quarter of her town starved to death in the 90s. And what's really sick is the people who were the most loyal to the government were the ones who starved first, because they're like, oh no, Kim Jong-il is going to save us, he's going to send us rice next week. And those are the ones, obviously, who died first. And her favorite movie and book is The Hunger Games, because she's like, oh, this is just like North Korea. How do they know? And I'm like, am I allowed to laugh at this? The other thing that they do is when they smile in pictures, they say kimchi. And my first thought was that's really racist. And I'm like, wait, no, it's not racist, it's what you guys do. But it was very jarring to see. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there anywhere we can see those pictures that you took?
No, I have them on my Facebook hidden because I don't want my guide to get in trouble. Yeah, so there's one, which is me with the two leaders, but I have those hidden with good reason. And the other question is people are like, oh, are you sure, aren't you worried they're going to come kill you? I'm not a human being to them, I'm an American, so they only go after their own. They only go after North Korean refugees and those who speak out, whereas Westerners were garbage anyway, so there's not even any point wasting effort on us. Anyone else? Go ahead.
You said you left them on Facebook, but just hit them?
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of risky?
I'm not going to accept friend requests from randos,
No,
especially in Korean.
No, I mean like, you're still uploading them to the internet, that's pretty risky.
Well, they don't have access to the internet, as you know.
I mean like, as a political statement here in the States, like if they were leaked or anything.
Tourist photos? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, I don't really know, I'm just,
I'm not too worried about. I mean, the book's much more against the regime. I mean, it's not a concern. And I know for a fact my guide is fine because I see her on Instagram. So, and in fact, one of the pictures she was doing duck face incorrectly. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
What was, like, I don't know, like here we have like K through 12 basic education. What could you tell was like their form of basic education, like more or less, or?
So a lot of their education is based on the life, imaginary life of the great leader Kim Il-sung and dear leader Kim Jong-il. When he was 13, supposedly, the great leader walked to Manchuria from North Korea, like a 1,000-mile walk, and he fought wild beasts along the way. So you have to have a test where he stopped at every town he stopped along the way, things like that. When you're in any American school, usually you're going to have an atlas on the wall, right, a world map. There, the maps are of Korea. So they don't even know like all the countries of the world. The ones that they know are U.S., Russia, China, Britain, Japan, South Korea, and maybe a few others. But they would not be able to rattle off, let's say, all the countries in Central America. There's no way. So it's very interesting what they are. Again, it's not Korean. We don't need to know about it. And that way people don't get any wrong ideas. They took us to a computer lab, a fake computer lab, and it's just really funny because they're really bad at faking things because they don't have access to like how normal people do things. If you walk into a computer lab, like a group of people, someone's going to turn their head and be like, oh, who's this, right? But they're just at their computers, they're like, oh, I am using internet. But they're like, some of the monitors weren't plugged in, and they don't really know how to use a mouse. It's like, you're not getting over people. It's kind of, and it's funny, like they took us to the maternity hospital. They're very proud of this maternity hospital. And you go, and like there'd be a computer in the hallway, but it's not plugged in. It's like, and there's someone like on a microscope. It's like, oh, I'm doing science. See, on a microscope. Like that's, it's just like, I'm sure you're not making some kind of weird placental discoveries right in front of us. So it's when they're not good at lying to tourists, despite what people in the West think. Like it's really obvious when they're fake and what's real. And just talking to a few of the people, and talking to guys, they open their mouths a lot. The rules are you can't acknowledge anything's wrong, and you can't criticize the government. But other than that, they run their mouths pretty heavily. So, yeah, it's just fascinating talking to them. The thing that drives me crazy, sometimes people ask me, are you sick of talking about North Korea, and so on and so forth, and it's like, I can't be sick of it, and I'm going to use the word privilege, because everyone I met is still there. Every kid I heard coughing is still there. Their parents are still there. Their grandparents are still there. Everyone I saw on the street, every girl, they are all still there. They will never be allowed to leave. And no matter how much money they have and how powerful they have. In fact, if you're a North Korean diplomat and you go to another country as an ambassador or something, you have to have family behind in North Korea so they're hostages to make sure you don't defect. I mean, this is how pervasive their level of control is over people there. So it's just awful. Yeah, anyone else? Go ahead.
Is the experience something you would recommend for people?
I had a friend do it. I hate being one of these people who's like, I went on this trip and it changed my life. I saw poor people. I don't like that attitude at all, but it definitely messes with your head a lot. I mean, this country more than any others. I recommended it to my friend, he went, and part of me was like, oh, maybe I could go again, and then I was looking at his photos, I'm like, I can't go through this again, because it's so evil, just everywhere you go. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's a giant, there were 3 or 4 American soldiers who defected into North Korea from South Korea. They didn't know much about it at the time, and one of them escaped decades later. And in his autobiography he wrote, I didn't realize the country I was defecting into was literally a giant demented prison. And that's exactly what it is. You know, it's you can't even begin to wrap our minds what it's like, because every aspect of it is evil and crazy. It's not just like a crazy desk, it's the crazy building with the crazy people, and you know, people listening in your phone calls and watching you all the time. It's not psychologically healthy, to say the least. Girl in the back.
One of my teachers were discussing communist countries and how there's mass starvation, population starts to decline and starts collapsing into itself. Do you think that eventually is going to happen for them?
Well, that happened in the 90s.
Is it going to continue to happen to get to a point, you know, that it doesn't like continue to run the way it is?
I don't think, if I had to bet money on it, I don't think the North Korean regime is long for this world. I think the fact that you have the entire UN united against them, I think the fact that China is turning their back against them, I think the fact that the president is like, all right, I've had enough of this crap with these people. I don't know what it's going to take. There's a line from Hemingway or Steinbeck, and even though I say this line all the time, I will never be able to remember who, where he says, how did you go bankrupt? 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. So when these kind of countries go down, they go down really fast and really hard. Phrasing, sorry. But this is what the beginning of the end would look like. First of all, I don't care how smart he is, Kim Jong-un's just a kid, number one. Number 2 is, when you have poverty and people, they're not being able to control the population, more and more info is coming in from the outside world, and you have, I could be a rich person in Pyongyang, if I'm a kid, I want to listen to K-pop, or watch crappy TV. And to be told no for no reason makes no sense to me, and it's going to be a source of resentment. And especially you have all these people in these village towns, in these border towns, looking across the river and seeing that, why do they have electricity in China? And you being told, mind your business. It's like, no, I just want electricity just like the Chinese do, who supposedly are beneath us, because we're Korean and we're the best people ever. So this is very much increasing to be the case. And again, once you realize that the people who are running your country, oh, this is a great story. So one of the things I came across in the literature, when I talk about this in my book, is Kim Jong-il can shrink time. So he's at this meeting, and this is true, he can shrink time, and so can all of you. So he's at this meeting, and someone's speaking, and he's working on laws, whatever, on his work, and his aide keeps stopping him and asking him questions, and he's answering the aide, and the speaker stops. And Kim Jong-il goes, why are you stopping? He goes, well, you're doing these other things. He goes, no, I can do all these things at once. And from then on, everyone in North Korea said Kim Jong-il doesn't look at time as a plane, but as a cube. And he can shrink time. And I told this to my friend, she goes, does he mean multitasking? And yes, that's literally what they mean by shrinking time. And apparently, Kim Jong-il is the only person in the whole country who's capable of doing this. So a big part of the propaganda is, since everyone in North Korea apparently is a fuck-up, but the leader, if that leader goes away, it's going to be really bad for them. So you better make sure that you have what they call the spirit of the bullet and bomb, and that you're willing to lay down your life for the leader, because he's the only thing standing between you and not only the country going to hell, but the U.S. imperialists coming back and killing you all. And I talked to another refugee, and she said the movie The Interview was a great idea, not because it's a good movie, because it shows that we're not scared of him. So their big myth is that we're all quaking in our boots, terrified of Kim Jong-un, and in fact, we're scared of the nukes, but he is not regarded as some kind of brilliant mastermind, to say the least. Go ahead.
Was there any issue in your mind knowing that by going on this tour you were kind of essentially funding the government?
Yeah, that is a very fair question. It's like, okay, I am giving money to, and this other refugee goes, look, she very much discourages people from going. She's like, would you go on a tour of Hitler's Germany? You're giving money to Hitler. And absolutely, I was giving money to Hitler. And that is true. That is not something I love. That said, I think on net, I have done a great deal, as much as I can, to kind of take down this country, take down this government, and educate people about what's going on there. So that's kind of how I made my peace with that situation. But yeah, that's a very fair point. Anyone else? Okay, good. Well, I have 3 books if you guys want them. If you don't, that's fine too. But make sure you write those good essays and get your extra credit, okay?